I was 9 years old the first time my sister told me I was the reason our family couldn't have nice things. We were at my aunt's place in Barry for Thanksgiving. I had spilled cranberry sauce on the tablecloth, one of those white linen ones that my aunt brought out only twice a year. My sister was 17. She looked at me across the table, then looked at the adults, and said it the way people say things they've been saving up. Carefully, like she'd rehearsed it. "This is why we can't take her anywhere." My aunt laughed a little and changed the subject. My parents said nothing. I spent the rest of that dinner cutting my turkey into very small pieces and staring at my plate. That moment didn't break me. But it planted something. A quiet knowing that no matter what I did or said, my sister had already written the story of who I was, and the people who should have argued with her had decided it was easier not to. Her name is Vanessa, and she is 4 years older than me. Growing up, she was the one who got the grades, the friends, the approval that came without conditions. I was the one who got the footnotes. Not bad enough to be a problem. Just enough of one that everyone noticed. She was sharp in the way certain people are sharp. Not cruel, exactly, but precise. She knew exactly where to press and how lightly to do it so that no one watching would call it what it was. I spent my 20s getting smaller around her, editing myself at family dinners, laughing off comments that weren't funny, building a version of myself that fit inside the space my family had left for me, which was not very large. Then I met Adrian. He was 34. I was 30. We met at a friend's birthday dinner at a restaurant on Queen Street West in Toronto, the kind of place with Edison bulbs and charcuterie boards, and too many people standing in the entrance. He was there for the same friend from a completely different circle. By the end of the night, we had talked for 2.5 hours without noticing and split an Uber home going in opposite directions because neither of us wanted to stop talking. He was a project manager for a renewable energy firm. He was calm in a way I hadn't met before. Not passive, not checked out, just genuinely settled in himself. He didn't need me to be easier or softer or less. He just wanted to know what I actually thought. We dated for 22 months before he proposed at the kitchen table in our condo in the Junction. He had cooked dinner, badly, which he acknowledged. He had a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a simple gold band with a small oval sapphire, nothing flashy, and he asked me to with his voice going a little unsteady, in the way it only does when he's genuinely nervous. I said yes while his pasta was burning on the stove, and we didn't eat until almost 10 o'clock, and neither of us cared. We booked a venue in Niagara-on-the-Lake for a Saturday in August. The rehearsal dinner was planned for the Friday evening, a private room at a restaurant called Harvest Table, exposed stone walls, long wood tables, a menu built around local Ontario produce. Our closest people. The people we had chosen. I let myself believe, for several months of planning, that this was something my family could not find a way to reach inside. I was wrong. My sister has always had a particular gift for timing. She doesn't strike when things are bad. She strikes when things are good, because that is when it hurts the most. And I think some part of her has always known that without ever saying it out loud. 11 days before my wedding, Adrian came home from work quiet. Not tired quiet, something else. He set his bag down by the door instead of on the hook where he always puts it. He poured himself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen counter, drinking it with his back to the room. I asked him what happened. He turned around and said he needed to tell me something, and he needed me to let him finish before I said anything. My sister had called him that morning at work. She'd gotten the number from my parents, who had it for emergencies. She told him that when I was 24, I had been involved in a financial situation that my family had covered up. She said I had borrowed a significant amount of money from our parents. She said $40,000 to pay off debts from a period when I had, in her words, completely lost control. She told him I had never paid it back. She told him that I had a pattern of hiding things, and that she was telling him this because she cared about him and didn't want him to walk into a marriage without knowing who he was really marrying. She told him to think carefully about whether he could trust me with joint finances. I stood in our kitchen and I felt something go very cold and very still in the center of me. Not because the story was complicated, because it wasn't. There was no $40,000. There were no hidden debts. There was no covered-up financial crisis. There was nothing like what she had described. What there was, and what she had twisted into something unrecognizable, was a single year in my mid-20s when I had gone through a genuinely hard stretch. I had lost my job at a marketing firm when they downsized their entire Toronto office. I had been between contracts for 7 months. I had used my line of credit. I had borrowed $4,000 from my parents, not 40, and I had paid it back within 18 months. I had the bank records. I had the e-transfer confirmations. I had the text from my mother saying the transfer had come through. My sister knew all of this. She had been there. She had watched me come out the other side of that year. She had watched me rebuild. And she had taken that year, stretched it beyond recognition, added a zero to the number and a narrative about who I was underneath, and handed it to the man I was about to marry 11 days before our wedding. Adrian did not accuse me. He did not demand. He just stood in our kitchen and said quietly, "Is there anything you want to tell me?" And I sat down on one of our bar stools and told him everything. The layoff, the 7 months, the line of credit, the 4,000, the payback. I showed him my phone. I pulled up the e-transfers right there at the kitchen counter, dated and confirmed, and I handed it to him and watched him read it. He read it twice. Then he set the phone down and said, "I believe you. Not thank you for explaining. Not I had a feeling it was something like that. Just, I believe you." He also said she called me at work. She had my direct line. She planned this. That was the part that sat heaviest between us for the rest of the night. Not the lie itself, though the lie was bad enough, but the planning, the reach. The fact that my sister had sat somewhere and thought carefully about what to say and who to say it to and when, and had decided that 11 days before my wedding was the right moment to do it. We talked until past midnight. We went to bed without resolution. I lay awake, and I felt something I had been trying not to feel for 30 years, which was that my sister did not want me to have this. Not Adrian specifically. Just the thing he represented. The life that was mine, built by me, chosen for me by no one else. She had watched me build it, and she had reached in at the last possible moment to pull something loose. What she did not know, what neither she nor my parents had any way of knowing, was that something was already in motion that would change the shape of the Friday to come. 3 years before Adrian proposed, I had a coworker named Bethany. She was a financial analyst at the firm where I was then a communications manager. We weren't close in the way that required maintenance. We had lunch together twice a week, we vented about the same project lead, we got drinks occasionally after bad Tuesdays. When I changed jobs in 2021, we stayed connected the way you stay connected with people you genuinely like, but whose schedule no longer overlaps with yours. Text every few months. The occasional coffee when one of us was in the other's neighborhood. Bethany had met my sister once. At a work holiday party that my sister had attended as someone's guest. Bethany was good at reading people, and she had formed a clear impression in about 40 minutes, which she had shared with me diplomatically after the party, and which I had mostly deflected because I was not yet ready to say out loud what I already knew about my sister. When Bethany found out about the phone call, I told her to text that same night because I needed to say it to someone who was not also processing it. She didn't respond with sympathy first. She responded with a question. She asked whether my sister had ever done anything like this before. I said yes. She asked whether I had documentation of the actual loan and repayment. I said yes, all of it. Then she said, "Hold on to everything." And then she went quiet for a few days in a way I didn't fully understand until she showed up at harvest table on the Friday evening. I hadn't invited her. She wasn't in our wedding party. I didn't know she was coming until I saw her standing in the entrance of the restaurant in a dark green blazers, holding a craft paper envelope, scanning the room for me. The rehearsal dinner was already in motion when she arrived. The room was warm, the kind of August warmth that makes stone walls feel generous instead of cold. The tables were set with linen runners and clusters of late summer flowers from a farm stand in Virgil. Adrian was at the far end of the room with his brother and his father, laughing at something, relaxed in the way he gets when he's genuinely at ease. His mother, a woman named Frances who had treated me with uncomplicated warmth from the first dinner we had together, was talking to my friend from university near the window. The room felt like something I had earned. My sister was seated midway down the table. She was wearing a silk top in dusty blue, and she was on her second glass of wine, and she was performing the version of herself she performs at events where photographs will be taken. Poised, pleasant, turned slightly outward, never quite present. My parents were beside her. My father was talking to Adrian's uncle. My mother was smiling at something across the room. They had called me 3 times since the phone call to Adrian. I had not picked up. I had not uninvited them from the rehearsal dinner because some exhausted, stubborn part of me had decided that they did not get to make me smaller at my own table by forcing me to acknowledge what they'd done before I was ready. I would deal with it. I had just not known, until Bethany walked through that door, exactly when. I went to her immediately. She took me by the arm and we stepped out into the corridor outside the private room. the noise of the gathering filtering through the closed door. She handed me the envelope and told me to look inside. There was a printed copy of a text thread between my sister and a former colleague of mine. Someone my sister had tracked down through LinkedIn, apparently. A woman who had worked briefly on a financial wellness initiative our firm had run in 2019, someone who had access to certain internal records at the time. My sister had contacted her in early July, 2 months before our wedding. She had asked this woman to confirm, to anyone who asked, that I had been flagged during that period for misuse of a company expense account. This was not true. It had never happened. I had never been flagged for anything at any job I had ever held. The woman my sister contacted, to her credit, considerable credit actually, had screenshotted the conversation and sent it to Bethany. They had a mutual connection. She had felt uncomfortable with what my sister was asking and had wanted it on record somewhere. Bethany had spent the intervening weeks verifying the relevant details, putting together the documentation, and deciding that the Friday before my wedding was the right moment to hand it to me, not before, because she hadn't wanted me to spend the weeks between then and now carrying the weight of it. I stood in that corridor for a long time. The thing about finally having proof of something you have always sensed but could never name is that it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like grief. I had known, at some bone-deep level for most of my life, that my sister was not simply difficult or occasionally unkind or operating from her own unexamined damage. I had known that there was something more deliberate in it, something that enjoyed the precision. And now I was holding that knowledge in printed form in a craft paper envelope outside my own rehearsal dinner, 11 days after she had called my fiancé at his office, and I felt something settle in me that was not peace, and was not rage but was somewhere between them. The specific quiet of a person who no longer has to wonder. I walked back into that room, and Adrian was already watching the door. He reads me the way I have never let myself be read before, and he came across the room without me having to signal anything, and put his hand on the small of my back and said quietly, "What happened?" I handed him the envelope. He read it, standing in the middle of the room. He read it the way he reads everything important, slowly, completely, without interrupting himself. When he finished, he folded it carefully and handed it back to me. He said, "What do you want to do?" I told him. I walked to where my sister was seated. I set the envelope on the table in front of her. I did not raise my voice because I had learned a long time ago that quiet lands harder than loud in rooms where loud is expected. I told her clearly, with the table listening, and the August light still warm through the windows and the late flowers in their jars, and the room going very still, what the envelope contained. I told her that I knew she had contacted my fiancé 11 days ago. I told her I knew he had contacted a former colleague before that. I told her I knew what she had been trying to build, and what she had been hoping it would take apart. I told her I had the documentation. I told her I had the records. I told her that I had spent 30 years being the version of me that fit inside the story she had written, and that I was done fitting. Then I asked her to leave. My father started to say something. I looked at him. He stopped. My sister picked up her bag. She did not look at me. She did not look at Adrian. She walked to the door with my parents behind her, and they left, and the door closed, and the room was quiet for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then Frances, Adrian's mother, the woman who had never once made me feel like a guest in her family's life, stood up from her seat at the end of the table. She picked up her wine glass, and she said, with a steadiness that made everything feel somehow formal and real at the same time, "To the woman who built something beautiful and didn't let anyone burn it down." And the table raised their glasses, and I stood there in the warmth of that room with Adrian's hand, finding mine and Bethany across the table, watching me with eyes that had gone bright, and I let it be what it was. Not a performance, not a victory. Just a room full of people who had chosen to be there, and me finally choosing to let them. We got married the next afternoon in the garden at the venue in Niagara-on-the-Lake, under a canopy of white fabric that moved a little in the August wind. The ceremony was exactly what we'd wanted, small, true, entirely ours. 31 people, the ones who had shown up when it mattered. My sister was not there, my parents were not there. I had called my mother the morning of the wedding. She had picked up, which surprised me. I told her that I loved her, because I did, and that I hoped she understood why I was saying what I was about to say, which was that I needed time and distance and that I would be the one to reach out when I was ready. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she hoped I'd be happy. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. I filed it away and let the day begin. Adrian cried during his vows, not dramatically, just his voice going unsteady when he got to the part he had written himself, which was about what it meant to be trusted with someone who had learned not to trust easily. I made it through mine without crying until the very end, when I looked out at the small crowd and saw Bethany in the third row, pressing her lips together, trying not to lose it. And then I lost it, and she lost it, and our officiant paused graciously, and everyone laughed. We signed our marriage certificate on a table set up outside under a tree, and the photographer got a shot of that moment. Both of us leaning over the paper, his hand on my back, mine on his, the shadows of the leaves moving across the white page. And when I look at it now, that is the image that says the most to me about who we are. My name is Hazel, and I am 32 years old. I spent most of those years believing that the story my family told about me must have been at least partly true. That where there is that much smoke, there is eventually fire. That if the people who raised me had decided early on who I was, maybe they had access to something I couldn't see. I gave that story enormous amounts of real estate in my mind, and in my choices, and in the slow, careful way I learned to move through rooms where I might be judged. I know now that the story was never about me. It was about a power that required my smallness to function. And the moment I stopped being small, not loudly, not dramatically, just by building a life that was mine and standing in it, the story fell apart. Because it had never been structurally sound. It had only ever been held up by the fact that I kept agreeing to hold it. If you are reading this and there is someone in your life who has written a story about you that you did not consent to be in, I want you to know something. You do not have to argue your way out of it. You do not have to disprove it point by point in a room where the referee is also the opponent. You just have to build something true and find the people who can see it, and let the evidence of your own life speak in a language that doesn't need their permission to be heard. If this story reached something in you, if something in it felt familiar in a way that made your chest tighten a little, please subscribe. We tell stories here because someone out there needs to know they're not imagining it. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and come back for the next one. The chapter you most need is probably still ahead.